So today I'm going to talk about something that is very relevant to the spiritual path, spiritual practice, and very relevant for our current times. Things are always unstable, but it's very overt at this time. So the topic today is refuge. And this is a potential for our spiritual practice. It is on offer that we can finally find something that is reliable. We can take refuge. We can take refuge in the Buddha, the Buddha's teaching, the Dhamma, and the followers of the Buddha, the Sangha, the community of other spiritual practitioners. This is what's on offer, and it truly is a refuge. The things that refuge represent: protection, reliability, foundation, clarity, safety, security. Think about a boat out on the ocean, and when it finally gets to harbor, it gets to take refuge. And that is what is on offer when we begin seriously to take up these wisdom teachings. And it is at the end of very, very many suttas, dozens of times in the scriptures, in the texts, where people will meet the Buddha, people will hear the Buddha, and the conclusion, it's quite formulaic. Magnificent, Master Gotama, magnificent. I go to the Buddha for refuge. I go to the Dhamma for refuge. I go to the Sangha for refuge. This taking refuge. And the Buddha Dhamma Sangha gets called the triple gem because of this. It's a precious jewel. So I'm actually going to talk about this for the next 3 weeks. And today I'll talk about the Buddha, the first part of what we take refuge in. And Buddha, we call Siddatha Gotama the Buddha, but it actually is a title like king, prime minister. It's a role, it's a function, the Buddha. And there are times in history when there is a Buddha alive, and then there are times in history when the Buddha is no longer physically alive, but the Buddha's teachings are alive and the Buddha's community is alive. And then there are times when that doesn't exist, when the teachings of the Buddha and the practice of the Buddha's teachings have faded out and it's no longer available. This is from the Connected Discourses in the book of 56, Sutta 48. So Samyutta Nikaya 56:48. A yoke with a hole. The yoke like a hula hoop. Modern day. Mendicants. This is the Buddha speaking. Mendicants, suppose the earth was entirely covered with water, and a person threw a yoke with a single hole into it. The east wind wafts it west, the west wind wafts it east, the north wind wafts it south, the south wind wafts it north. And there was a one-eyed turtle who popped up every 100 years. What do you think, mendicants? Would that one-eyed turtle popping up once every 100 years, still poke its neck through the yolk in that hole. Sorry, the hole in that yolk. And his very switched on followers answer, "It's unlikely, sir." And the Buddha goes on, "That's how unlikely it is to get reborn as a human being. And that's how unlikely it is for a realized one to arise in the world, a perfected one, a fully awakened Buddha. And that's how unlikely it is for the teaching and training proclaimed by a realized one to shine in the world. And how, mendicants, and now, mendicants, you have been reborn as a human being. A Buddha has arisen in the world, a perfected one, a fully awakened Buddha. And the teaching and the training proclaimed by a realized one shines in the world. That's why you should practice meditation." I've been on retreats. Yeah, your heart just gets. So, yeah, that's how incredibly unlikely it is, and how incredibly fortunate we are that we are here, that we're human, that we live in a free country, and that we have these teachings available. It's a truly, truly precious thing, and that they've touched our hearts. That they mean something to us. The Buddhist teachings are available. There's billions of people on the planet that it doesn't mean much to them. But the fact that we've come in contact with wisdom teachings, and that we realize, oh, there's wisdom here. This is very special. And please think of it as an infant baby or an infant plant, something that you want to nurture, something that you want to tend to, and see the fragility of it, and the need for it to be protected and cared for. And what is incredible is throughout when the Buddha speaks, and we'll get to this in the 3 weeks, when we do take up this practice, and when we learn more and more of the teachings, and when we learn more and more about our internal world, we actually begin to become a refuge for ourselves. And this is where it's all pointing. And this is what the Buddha is pointing to. And as we grow in our meditation practice, and in our spiritual practice, in our wisdom, and in our ethics, we become more and more independent, and truly our own refuge, a place of reliability and trustworthiness and truth and clarity. Very, very beautiful. So today I want to speak about the Buddha, and the fact that it is a role, and Buddha is a title, and it comes from the Pali root Bud, which is to be awake, to know, Buddha. So this current Buddhist dispensation that we live in, the Buddha that we are all hearing the teachings of, is the historical Siddatha Gotama. And Siddatha is his given name, and Gotama is his family name. And he lived 5th century before the Common Era. There's some debate in scholars, some place that's a little bit earlier, around the 5th century before the Common Era. And Siddhartha, that name, I'm actually doing the Sanskrit pronunciation with the R in it, but it's the one we hear more. It actually means one who accomplishes his goal. And Gotama, his family name, actually means one whose light is very bright. Very significant, auspicious names that he had. And he was born to into the Sakyan clan. And it was the caste system, still is in India. And the four castes, the main ones are the Brahmins and the Katyas and the Vesas and the Suddas. And the Brahmins were the priests, the religious, the highest, purest, and definitely looked down on all the other castes. And the Sakyan clan that Siddhartha Gautama was born into is in the Katya clan, and they're warriors. But they are aristocracy. And then the Vesas are the merchants, and the Suddas are the servants, the serfs. And then, of course, there were lower, the untouchables and the scavengers. And it was an oligarchy system that the Buddha was born into, and his father, Suddhodana, was the oligarch, the Raja. So Siddhartha was a prince, and he lived his first 29 years in princely fashion. In the texts, when he speaks about that part of his life, talks about he had 3 mansions, 3 palaces. I said on Tuesday night, here we are in Canmore. We know people that live like this, that they have a house for each season. And he describes being in his stilted palace during the rainy season, the monsoons, and never leaving the palace and being entertained by scores of musicians, none of whom were men. This is the life he lived. And then it's a true hero's journey, what happens next. And the folklore around it, the legends that you will hear about Siddhartha Gautama, is that he traveled out of the palace and saw these 4 heavenly messengers on 4 separate journeys out of the palace. And that's not completely accurate about our historical Buddha. That actually is a previous Buddha, Vipassi, that several Buddhas ago, our Buddha, and I'm not even clear that he went on these journeys out of the palace. He definitely was visited by 3 heavenly messengers, and that's enough. It was enough. And they are sickness, aging, and death. And when the Buddha, after his awakening, when he describes this beginning of his journey, he talks about contemplating, seeing sickness and contemplating it. This is not the Buddha's words, but I'll make it vernacularly that we can relate to. The Buddha was like, this is nuts. This is crazy that we respond to sickness with such aversion, because I'm of that same nature. I mean, I will get sick. And same about aging and about death. I can remember myself as a teenager visiting my grandparents in their seniors home, and that I'm sure all of you can relate to this as a teenager, that intense experience of this onslaught of old people, like in wheelchairs, just sitting, like parked in the hall, and many of them not in their right mind. And I can remember as a teenager such aversion, like I don't want that to happen to me. Like, and it feeling so far away, so distant, you know. And here I am. It's me. I'm the grandmother. I have such that feeling when I visit my family. I'm at the end of my life and it's their turn now. And I'm becoming the old person. And yeah, I'll stop there. It's changing topics. Dhamma talk. And then another thing that happened to me. Back to the Buddha, worth talking about. Yeah, so he has these contemplations about sickness, aging, and death, and and sets out to understand and to find answers, and to not just live the rest of his life in this delusional bubble of pleasure. And then boom, now he is sick and old and about to die, and he hasn't done anything about it. So a hero's journey. So he sets out at 29 and he begins by practicing outrageous austerities. And we're talking about Iron Age India, and many men were doing this. They became recluses. And in that culture, you could, this was an option. This was on offer to them. You could just sort of walk out the door of your house and then just wander and collect alms, wear some kind of robe. The Buddha didn't make this up. This was in the culture that he was born in. And the practice at that time, you were called a sadhu, and you would find some other guru and follow their teachings, practice their teachings, and see where it led. And often then you'd meet another ascetic, wandering ascetic, and some of them were practicing outrageous things, like they were naked and they were acting like dogs. There were all kinds of, well, I mean, there's always been all kinds of crazy ideas about, sprinkle this dust here and then jump 4 times. I mean, there's always been teachings that, okay, I'll try that. I mean, many of us are desperate. So he did these outrageous austerities, 6 years. He was barely eating, barely breathing. And he talks about he would touch the front of his body and he would be touching his backbone. He was emaciated. His hair was falling out. And then after 6 years, he had this memory of when he was a young boy and he had gone to this festival with his father. And, we're parents, his dad had said, son, sit here and I'll be back in a little bit. And so he's maybe 6 years old. He's sitting under this rose apple tree. It's a beautiful day. It's the middle of the day. The wind is very, very slight. And he, obviously, because of past life cultivation, he falls into a very deep state of meditation and peace and ease and bliss. And after these 6 years of terrible austerity, he remembers that. And he realizes that's the direction I need to go. And then he begins that kind of practice. And the night of his awakening, he goes into these deep, deep states of meditation and then has breakthroughs to these 3 knowledges. And the first is the knowledge of his past lives. And he sees many, many, many past lives, many. And the second knowledge, the second watch of the night, is that that individuality of that sort of fans out, and he realizes every being is being reborn in these different circumstances, and that's all based on karma. It's all based on cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. You know, it's a system. And then the third watch of the night, he discovers the Four Noble Truths, rediscovers every Buddha. That's what they penetrate through to the Four Noble Truths. And he's completely free and come to understand when there's no birth, there's no death. Dependent origination, the Four Noble Truths. And he's awakened. And he knows he's awakened. And he knows what he's awakened to. And then he just hangs out in bliss for about 6 weeks. And he's very reticent to teach. He's 35 now. And during that 6 weeks, he has different contemplations and different experiences, and realizes, no, as hard as it will be, as difficult as it will be for me to figure out a way to teach this, there are beings alive that have little dust in their eyes. That's the expression in the text. Little dust in their eyes, that just get some of that dust out and they will be able to see clearly. This is all about wisdom and understanding. And so he thinks, who are those beings? Who can I teach? And he remembers two beautiful older mystics from his life that he knew, and then comes to realize they've both died. So his next go-to is, he remembers these 5 companions that were practicing the austere practices with him. And he thinks that's who I need to teach. Because they're completely sold out. They're earnest. They're giving it their all. They're going in the wrong direction, but they're giving it their all. I'll go teach them. And he's not very good at first. And I want to read it because I think it's funny. And this actually is not from the suttas, it's from the Vinaya, the code of discipline for the monastics. And it's the Buddha's first encounter trying to explain. And he doesn't really explain. And you'll see he's not that good. Not that good. But he's so amazing. He's a very quick learner. And by the time he gets to the 5 ascetics, he realizes what to teach. And he teaches his first sermon, which is, it's called the Dhamma Chakkapavatana Sutta. It's the beginning to turn the wheel of the Dhamma. And we're still experiencing that turning of the wheel of the Dhamma. And in that first sermon, his very first teaching, he is addressing his beginning of his life and then his 6 years of ascetic practice. And he's like, neither are right. They're both way extremes. And the way to freedom from suffering is this middle path where there's enough pleasure and there's enough joy that and there's enough suffering that we find this middle way. But this first encounter, when he's heading out to talk to these 5 ascetics, he encounters another ascetic. This is what was commonplace. So the Ajivaka ascetic Upaka saw the Buddha traveling between Gaya and the place of his awakening. And he said to the Buddha, "Sir, your senses are clear and your skin is pure and light. Like, dude, you are radiating. In whose name have you gone forth? Like, who's your teacher? I want in. Who is your teacher and whose teaching do you follow? So this is the Buddha's first go. The Buddha replied to Upaka in verse, I am the victor, the knower of all. Abandoning all, I am not soiled by anything. Through my own insight, I'm freed by the ending of craving. So who could I refer to as a teacher? I have no teacher. No one like me exists. In the world with its gods, I have no equal, for I'm the perfected one, the supreme teacher. I alone am fully awakened. I'm cool and extinguished. I'm going to the city of Ghazi to set rolling the wheel of the teaching in this world immersed in darkness. I'll beat the drum of freedom from death. According to your own claim, this is Upaka, like, whoa. According to your own claim, you must be a universal victor. Indeed, those like me are victors, those who have ended the corruptions. I've conquered all bad traits. Therefore, Upaka, I am the victor. And Upaka is saying, may it be so. Upaka shook his head and sadly, ended up being turned off and chose the wrong path and left. And then the Buddha didn't do that again. So I want to end, sort of talk very briefly about, that's one extreme, and you do get that in the teachings where the Buddha is really, really clear, and he's insanely confident, and he's really clear that he's fully awakened, and he lets us know that because I think he wants us to be really confident in following him. But there are also many places where you see his humanity, and this is the point that he is a human. He's not a god. He's a human being, and he's completely realized his full potential. And he lived in a different culture, and still he completely blew out the caste system and talks on and on and on about it's not so, it's by karma. So it's what we do. And his monastic order, the caste system is gone. And this is radical, completely radical. And he had an order for females. This is also completely radical. There weren't female recluses walking around. There weren't. And he realized in that culture that wasn't safe. So, but he figured it out. He figured out a way for women to go forth, to wear robes, to shave their heads, and to live together communally in a group. And this was radical. Women at that time, you were owned by somebody. You'd see families walking, and it would be the man, and then the son, and then the ox, and then the wife. This was the order of things in that culture, and women were owned. You were owned by your father, and then you were owned by your husband, and if he died, you were owned by your son. You had to be connected to a man, or you were just free game. It could just rape you, and it's not rape because you're just lying there. You're free. So what the Buddha did was radical. Women that went forth were landowners, and they had monasteries, and they ran the monastery and were decision makers. And the Buddha was very, very human. I'm just going to highlight three things. In Asia, there's a lot of legend and folklore, and he's almost been deified. But when you read the texts, no, he was a human being, and he left his wife and newborn son to embark on his hero's journey. And about a year after his awakening, 7 years after he left, he returns and he teaches his son. And his son becomes a monk, and then he teaches him again as a teenager and a young adult, and he becomes an arhat, his son. His wife becomes a bhikkhuni. His father, like he took care of his family and gave them what's really worthwhile, which is the Dhamma, the teachings. But his humanity, there's quite a long sutta in the middle length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta 128. It's called the Corruptions. And the Buddha is speaking with three very close followers, and they're struggling. I mean, they're quite far in their meditation, where they have what's called a nimitta. They're perceiving a light, and they're perceiving forms, but they're not able to sustain it, and it's sort of all collapsing. And this is a stage in meditation where things are beginning to get really very, very still and subtle, and you're sort of on a brink, but you have to find out how to pass through that threshold. And the Buddha talks about his own experience at that stage in his meditation. And there's the Buddha talking about there's 11 different things that are causing things to sort of fall apart. And they're all what we deal with, like lack of focus, some inattention, doubt, fear, dullness, elation, on and on. This is the sutta where I feel like the Buddha is the most human. I can relate to him so much. And there's another passage that also means a lot to me. It's like, whoa, I can just hear him. And it's 1 week after his awakening. And this is from the Connected Discourses, and the first book, and chapter 4, the first sutta, and it's called Austere Practice. And this is 1 week after the Buddha's awakening. And then, while the Buddha was alone in seclusion, a reflection arose in his mind. Just listen to him. I am indeed freed from that grueling asceticism. He's so relieved that, he can eat and he can breathe and he can, that like he's done with that crazy stuff he was doing. I am indeed freed from that grueling asceticism. It is good indeed that I am freed from that useless, grueling asceticism. It is good that steady and mindful I've attained awakening. You just, like, wow, that was so hard. And there's another time where, and this again happens a few times in the text, where the Buddha is with his monks, and you can kind of feel him just sort of looking out, at the monks. And he says, and again, this is a few times in the suttas. Yeah. And the quote I'll give is from the Long Discourses 16. But a few times he says this. It's through not understanding, not penetrating the Four Noble Truths, that I, as well as you, have for a long time run on and gone round the cycle of birth and death. And again, for me, the Buddha just, he lumps us all together. He's like, it's through our own ignorance that me and you, have just been bumping around samsara for eons. I really feel like I feel his humanity. So the other huge theme when you look at the Buddha and learn about the Buddha and think about the Buddha is his compassion. And just two passages. And again, he says this many times. I'll quote from this first one is from the Connected Discourses, in the book of 47, Sutta 9. And the Buddha is just explaining, I've taught the Dhamma without making a distinction between inside and outside. I have no closed fist of a teacher in regard to the teachings. Everything is open. It's on offer. We're not embarked on this thing where there's, these secret teachings later that you pay $1,000 for, and that there's nothing behind the screen. It's all he means it for everyone, and he's taught us what we need to know. So in conclusion, from Majjhima, the middle length discourses, Sutta 19, again, this is so many times. He ends his discourses so many times, just saying what should be done for their students out of compassion by a teacher who seeks their welfare and has compassion for them, that I've done. I've done for you. And then I'll always say, there are these roots of trees, these empty huts. Meditate, do not delay, or else you will regret it later. This is my instruction to you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.